OACNFers, I'll be at Dudley's Bookshop Cafe in Bend, Oregon on Sunday, October 19th. Time to be determined, but it's likely early afternoon. And if you're in Eugene, the 4th live podcast recording will take place Sunday, October 26th, 1 p.m. at Gratitude Brewing. I'll be interviewing Jason Brown, author of the Memoir, Character Witness. Stay plugged into the newsletters and BrendanOmara.com. Hey. Oh, hey, in the call for submissions, we got 2 more. Well, no, that was the last time I read it. We've had 0 since the last time we had 2 more. The audio magazine is back, and codes is the theme. The Mandalorian and his kind live by a simple code, always punctuated by saying, "This is the way." What codes do you live by? Has a code led you right or wrong? Essay should be no longer than 2,000 words. It's about a 15-minute read. Bear in mind that these essays, in the end, are audio essays. Write accordingly. Email submissions with codes in the subject line to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Originally, previously, unpublished work only. Please, deadline is October 31st. Are we going to extend? Are we going to keep it? I don't know. You tell me. There is cash on the line from the O'Mara grant, so send me your best fully formed pieces and consider becoming a patron to help put money in the coffers that helps put burrito money in the pockets of writers.
That's how I wanted to kick it off, just as a kind of like a hard, slap in your face, like, hey, pay attention. You're in for a hell of a ride.
OACNFers is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm Brendan O'Mara, and my life coach says I shouldn't put myself down as much as I do. But isn't there an expectation for it now? Like, would you even recognize me? Isn't my insufferable negativity and self-loathing part of my appeal? Stupid fuck. Damn it. Old habits. We have Jeremy X. Wagner on the show today. The dude is a stone-cold badass and the co-author, ghostwriter, of Fireproof, Memoir of a Chef, published by Dead Sky Publishing. Jeremy, man, he's a heavy metal musician, founder of the death metal band Broken Hope. He's friends with Kirk Hammett, so now I'm like 1 degree of separation from the lead guitarist of my favorite band. But this is about Jeremy. He's the author of the novels Rabid Heart, which was nominated for the Best Horror Novel at the 2019 Splatterpunk Awards, and the novel The Armageddon Chord. He has a new novel coming out in January titled Wretch. So stay clued into JeremyXWagner.com for more information on that. Show notes of this episode more at BrendanOmara.com. Hey. There, you can peruse for hot blogs, tasteful nudes, and sign up for my 2 very important newsletters, the flagship Rage Against the Algorithm and Pitch Club. Issue 5 with Justin Heckert went up. It's a bit of a curveball. Go check it out. Also, if you care to support the podcast with a few dollar bills, you can always go to patreon.com/cnfpod. There are some rad perks, but most are just happy to throw a few bucks into my guitar case. Okay, so a little more about Jeremy. He's the CEO of the TV film company Aphotic Media and the indie publishing company Dead Sky Publishing. He has a very varied creative life, which I find inspiring and really fucking cool. In this conversation, we talk about how he became an accidental publisher, playing guitar, being turned on by Ride the Lightning, passion and imagination as a driver, learning the business inside and out, competition, trust, and how he translated Chef Curtis Duffy's voice onto the page. And Chef Curtis Duffy has had a life, man. Pretty inspiring figure. And he's a Michelin star-rated chef based out of Chicago. And he and Jeremy really hit it off. They got a good relationship founded on heavy metal music when they met in Chicago for Lollapalooza a few years ago when Metallica was headlining, and they went to dinner at his restaurant. And I don't know, they just vibed. Sometimes you just vibe with people. Parting shot on learning the biz, but for now, let's give it up for Jeremy X. Wagner, a true riff master. Listen to his debut album from Broken Hope called Swamped in Gore and tell me this guy doesn't know how to write the shit out of a riff. So here we go. Riff.
I go 3 days on not writing, I feel fucked up and, depressed.
I like to write books that sound more like someone telling a story over a campfire.
Then you got to keep moving on because tick, tick, tick tock.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
You are, you write novels, you write, short stories, and now, co-authoring nonfiction here with Curtis, and you're also a musician too. But just where did the love of stories and storytelling really take hold for you?
Oh, it started when I was really young, grade school. I just remember being a really avid reader, for one. I just loved books. And I'd say I started probably reading book after book, like really into books at age three and four. And I was reading a lot of kids' books, of course. And then my mom has always had a great library. So she was into mysteries and dark fiction and stuff like that. So she had all these Agatha Christie books and Alfred Hitchcock anthologies and stuff like that. And I'd start going through her books because I was drawn to the book covers. I was like, what's this about? And I was always kind of a horror kid. I was always into creepy stuff, and I remember tackling my first adult novel, I guess you would call it, would be Jaws by Peter Benchley. And I read that like 1975, 76. So it would have been, again, in grade school, age 5 or 6. I read that book and I started making up my own stories, my own little short stories. And the first thing I ever wrote, I still have it here. I've got this kind of like a journal, if you will. My grandmother gave that to me in grade school. And this is like a hardcover book that looks like it's made of denim, like a pair of jeans. There's like a pocket on it, right? And it says my book. And inside are lined pages. And my grandma gave that to me. It was like, you can write your own stories in here if you want. Because I'd be making up stories and telling my aunts and uncles and parents, grandparents, stuff off the top of my head. So I took that journal book and started writing stories based on things I saw on TV. There's a super cheesy movie called The Last Dinosaur from the 70s. And it's like, it was on TV. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. I was really into dinosaurs. I'm still into dinosaurs. I have an uncle who's a paleontologist, and I was always really into dinosaurs. So anyway, I saw this made-for-TV movie, and off the top of my head, I adapted that, wrote what I remembered of that. It was like kind of like my own book adaptation of a movie, if you will. So I started there, and then I just started making up other stories and even dark poetry and stuff. So it all started in grade school. So I was always a writer before I ever became a musician, for sure. And I never stopped writing since I was a kid,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so often a lot of kids have that creative fire early on that tends to get snuffed out. Tragically, it gets snuffed out by a lot of kids. You got to focus on something more serious, blah, blah, blah. How did you keep that flame alive?
It just was passion, really. I had this passion to use my imagination. And I think part of my growing up was also some great adults in my life who encouraged me to read. I had a school librarian who really encouraged my writing and my creativity. Also, the way I was brought up, I lived in rural central Wisconsin. My family's from Chicago, but when I was a little kid, we moved up to central Wisconsin and lived out in the country. So we didn't have like cable TV or satellite or anything like that. We had books, 3 channels that we could get in with rabbit ear antennas on a black and white TV.
Yeah.
And other than that, man, it was like using my imagination, exploring the woods, and fields, and, pretending I was like in a, Lord of the Rings J.R.R. Tolkien book, like with a stick for a sword and stuff like that. So I'd be doing like my imagination was always going. And I had these great adults that encouraged me to write, and same with books, just my passion for reading was a constant. And my mom was very encouraging with that as well. Passion really is the one fire inside me that's just never gone away. And as I got older, I would write lengthier short stories, and eventually those became novels. And in my band, I always wrote the lyrics. I'm not a singer by any means, but I would write the lyrics for all our songs for Broken Hope. And it's just all about passion,
Yeah.
anything you do. Someone who works with wood, like a woodsman, or someone who likes baking cookies, it's like, if you love what you do, there's a passion there, right? So until it grows up, you're tired of it or something, you move on. That's never gone away for me.
So how did how did you start locking into being a musician and heavy metal music?
Oh, I'd say probably when I was around age 12, I was starting to get into. I was always into music as a kid, so we always had albums at our house, and tons of vinyl and stuff. And my dad and his friends were into all kinds of rock, So I grew up listening to music just cranking in the house constantly. And there's bands that I really liked, as a kid in the 70s. And it was probably around age 12, I started discovering heavier bands. So I remember discovering heavy metal bands like Judas Priest and the album Screaming for Vengeance specifically. And then just buying all these metal albums. And it was kind of like when I go to a music store, it's kind of like going to a bookstore and look at all the album covers. And this is before you could, we had like heavy metal, radio stations and stuff. So I would just pick stuff up based on either the album cover looked cool or I saw them in some heavy metal magazine, right? And I'd say I started getting interested in guitar right around age 14, age 15. And that's when I discovered, but my tastes in metal also were getting into heavier and heavier music. And that's where I discovered Metallica's Ride the Lightning came out. And that was my life-changing album. That's when I'm like, I want to do that. I want to play guitar and do what they're doing, right? And that's how it all started. I got my first guitar. Technically, I got my first guitar at age 12. My mom got me an acoustic guitar, Gibson Epiphone, and I begged for a guitar. But then once I got it, I didn't do anything with it. And then later, when I got into metal and that Metallica album, Ride the Lightning, and wanted to play metal, I traded that acoustic guitar in and got my first electric guitar. And then from there, I took lessons and formed bands and never looked back. I think I got signed right out of high school. I already had Broken Hope formed by senior year in high school, and soon after graduation, we were signed and did our first album and everything. So, but it just all started with my love of metal and an album changing my life, and like that.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's amazing. How are they playing that? You know what I mean? It was like,
oh yeah,
blew my mind.
Exactly. I have that album and Puppets and Justice just memorized, and it's incredible. And what they were able to do, and how something, what they are so particularly great at is that you can write heavy, but it can also be melodic and can be musical, even though it's heavy. To an untrained ear, it might sound like noise, but when it's like, oh wow, this stuff is it can really translate across media, as we've seen with S&M and the way Apocalyptica does adapts their work. And then when you hear it with, say, an orchestra or see marching bands, you're like, oh, this is really musical. It's just really, it can be really loud and really distorted and just amazing.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. You sound like me when I was a teenager trying to educate my parents or other older people on metal. They're like, what is that? They're screaming and that's really fast music. It's like, you don't understand the level of musicianship these guys have. That it takes some skill to play, that at that speed and those melodies that they weave in there. It's like legit top level musicianship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love catching some old videos from like the Puppets and Lightning era of you'll see like the way how fast Hetfield can play, but he's singing over how fast
Yeah.
he's playing and everything. It's just blows my. I'm not a musician, but it's just like I see that I'm like, oh my god, the degree of coordination that you can detach it, like the muscle memory to be able to play that quick and sing. I mean, it's something you can speak to just through your skills, but it's just like it must blow you away in a way. Like,
yeah, I'm blown away by anyone that can play a guitar or an instrument and sing at the same time. Because I can't sing, right? But I can't even do like proper backups or anything. Like when I try to even talk while playing guitar, I can't do both at once. It's like people say, I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. It's like that for me. If I were to talk to you and we were at band practice and I was playing guitar, as soon as I start talking, my hands wouldn't be playing what I'm supposed to be playing. My hands start moving in syllables, like the way I'm talking, like, hey, Brandon, so about that thing, my hands are like going, hey, Brandon, what about, you know what I mean? Like I can't focus on both. It's a weird thing. I guess it takes practice, but I'm in awe of people that can do that,
And when you picked up the guitar, there is always inherent growing pains and the frustrations of learning a new skill and the hours you have to put in until you get some proficiency. The same can be true for any artistic discipline, but what were those growing pains like for you as you were learning your instrument?
When I first started taking lessons, I had my first teacher wasn't really the best teacher. Older guy down the street had a music store, and I went to him for lessons. And I wanted to learn some music theory, how to read music, and elements of music and whatnot. And I also wanted to learn heavy metal techniques like power chords and things like that. And that first teacher I had, like I said, he was an older guy. When I say older, I mean he was like my grandpa's age at the time when I was 16. Old Italian guy. I remember he'd make jokes like, I can't teach you heavy metal. The doctor says it's bad for my back. I feel like, what? You corny old man, like I want to get. I'm like, this guy doesn't get it. Anyway, it was funny, but I wanted a teacher that really knew that stuff. I got really lucky, as after that I found a music store where there was this great teacher, Tom, who I'm friends with to this day, and he was in college for music theory and guitar, and I think he's going for like a master's or something in music, right? And he was a guitar teacher at a guitar shop, and the thing was, he was also in a thrash band, so he was everything I could have hoped for. So he taught me all these really technical things on guitar I wanted to learn, like arpeggios and modes and speed runs and scales and all this stuff, and how to read music. And then he also taught me these elements of heavy metal guitar, power chords, picking techniques, things like that. And there were riffs I wanted to learn too, just to get an idea of how some of my heroes, if you will, played certain riffs. I wanted to learn those songs to get that idea. So I would ask him to transcribe like certain Metallica songs, Slayer, Dark Angel, stuff like that, and I'd play these riffs and I get down these techniques, and then right when I was doing that, I'd say within a year, I just practiced and practiced and practiced. That's all I lived for. And by the time I was 17, I was already writing my own music, and I didn't even have a band yet. I was writing full songs on guitar, and then I started forming my own bands, and it went from there. But it was just I think part of my acceleration, I guess, at getting proficient at guitar had a lot to do with just hunkering down and practicing so much. I was living for it, and that's passion too. I was just so passionate about guitar and learning it inside out, and then I was really into making my own songs, So, and I was never in a cover band or anything, despite wanting to learn techniques and some riffs of other bands early on. I never wanted to be in a cover band and play nothing but covers. A lot of guys I went to school with were always in cover bands and stuff, and I was in the stuff doing my own thing, writing thrash and death metal, stuff like that, and different songs that aren't necessarily metal, but I just loved it.
That's awesome. I love hearing you talk about kind of the rigor of it. I've heard Zach Wilde interviews. He's always a great interview. Like hearing him talk about just like the way to sort of to make it in guitar or in music or certainly anything is like you have to have such a drive and a burning fire to sit there with your instrument being the computer and writing and just tapping out words, or with your guitar for just hours and hours on end. Like he talks about doing it for like 8 hours a day. Like few people can afford that degree of time, but you do need to put in the work, and you got to work through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. And it seems like that's a lesson you really learned early on. It's just like you can you got to be bad first, and you got to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And no distractions either. Kind of like when I was telling you about how I grew up as a kid out in the country. By the time I was playing guitar, I was living back in the Chicagoland area, and I lived with my dad. And kind of like Wisconsin, we had a cheap TV. We didn't have cable TV. We could have had cable, we just couldn't afford it. We were like poor, so I just had a guitar. I didn't have distractions. I wasn't in front of the TV all day, and I was always reading a lot of books, and I had my guitar, and that's all I cared about was playing that guitar. So I think that one part, that dedication and applying yourself because you're so into something, is one thing, and part of that demands a lot of focus and not distractions. Looking back, I mean, I sound like old man Wagner here telling you this, but like no smartphones, no apps, nothing that takes your attention away from stuff.
Oh my God. Yeah, your app was your guitar. Like you just leaning into that.
Yeah,
like
exactly. Mm-hmm.
Were there any books that informed your music, and maybe music that informed the prose writing you would do?
When I was younger, I was really into Stephen King, especially my mom too. And I really loved his short fiction. And before I ever wrote a novel, I was always writing short stories. So Stephen King's short fiction, I think I didn't exactly write lyrics based on certain author stories. Like say if you look at Anthrax, right, they've got Among the Living, which is influenced by The Stand. For me, I think the only thing that influenced my story writing was just the element of dark fiction, because my short stories were always dark, either horror, scary stuff like that. There might be some kind of influence there, but that, I think that would be about it.
Yeah. At what point does the inspiration strike to have your own publishing imprint with Dead Sky Publishing?
Oh gosh, well that being a publisher was kind of an accident actually.
Mm-hmm.
I had this guy who had a small press called Death's Head Press, and he was doing really great stuff, and he was into music as well, like me, like bands I liked and stuff. So there's this photographer here in Chicago named Gene Ambo. He's been shooting for 45 years or something. And I told him, hey, you should do a book because you've got pictures like with so many bands and pictures no one's seen. So like back to Metallica, he was on the road with Metallica early on in their career. First 3 albums, he was shooting them a lot. And same with doing just shows everywhere, tours everywhere. He's more of a rock metal guy, Gene Amble, but he's shot everyone, you know, Madonna to Lady Gaga to, you know, BB King and on and on. He shot everybody, but he really loves metal and rock. So came up with this idea to do a book of photos for a venue called the Metro in Chicago. And Gene had been shooting shows at Metro for 40 years. And a lot of huge bands came to the Metro before the first time they ever played Chicago was at the Metro, I should say. So like when Metallica first came to Chicago, they played the Metro. Slayer, Anthrax, Celtic Frost to Nirvana, Garbage, Smashing Pumpkins, on and on. And he had all these great photos. So came up with this idea for a book called Heavy Metro. And this guy who ran Death's Head Press, I'm like, hey, why don't you broaden your horizons, put out this photo book? It's really great. It's a great project. And he was into it, but his partner wasn't. So that guy I pitched that to, he's like, I want to do more stuff like this. My partner doesn't. Why don't you and I do a publishing house together? And I was like, I'm not really interested in being a publisher. It's kind of like being in a band. I don't want to own a record label. I want to be on the creative side, you know.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in the trenches and trying to build this thing. But lo and behold, I got talked into it because the guy I partnered with, he's like, I'll do all the managing and I'll take care of all the business stuff, and you can acquire books that you know you want to see published. And there's a lot of the books and things and authors that I really am into that I wanted to see published. So that's how it started. We were called Stygian Sky Media at first, and that Death's Head Press imprint, I ended up buying out that guy's partner from that. So we had Death's Head Press imprint, Stygian Sky Media, and then what happened is we started growing. The first year, we decided to do a comic book graphic novel line, and we called that Dead Sky Publishing, the comic book graphic novel line. And that took off, and that was ran by a guy we brought on board named Steve Wands. And Steve Wands ended up within that first year doing comic books and graphic novels. He became my main partner. My other main partner exited. Steve became my main partner, and the comic book graphic novel line really took off. We kept signing more and more authors as well for Death's Head Press. We rebranded as Dead Sky Publishing too, got rid of Stygian Sky Media. And since then, it just kind of exploded. It got really, really big quick. You know, I always say we're the indie publisher with major publisher muscle. We've got the best distribution. We're in every bookstore now. It's just phenomenal. It's crazy. Airport bookstores I see our stuff in, and we got a great staff as well. We've got employees that work full time, and I got my wish, which is I don't have to be the face of the company or in the front lines. I'm trying to just do my thing, which is write full time. That's basically my job. So just write my own stuff, and once in a while I'll acquire something I'm into. But my team, they do a great job at that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And hearing you say a lot of those other bands like be it Pumpkins, Nirvana, Metallica, obviously, and Garbage, all these sort of big headlining type acts. And I think of that in writing too. There are certain names, and be it in fiction or nonfiction, who are those sort of marquee names. And then, of course, there are your peers too. And I've been one to look over my shoulder and compare myself to others, and it just always made me feel pretty rotten. But I wonder if just for you, over the course of the arc of your career, be it in music or writing, how have you metabolized that comparison trap that we so often as creative people find ourselves getting into?
As far as comparisons to what exactly? Like,
I guess maybe seeing maybe where you are on your path, and then you look over your shoulder and you see other people, and they seem to be on like maybe a different kind of rocket ship.
mm-hmm.
Like, and you just kind of feel a little maybe envious or jealous, and
Oh,
you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. And it's just like, I know that's just something I wrestle with. I've wrestled with it more in the past, but I've kind of somewhat matured out of it. But it does kind of rot you from the inside if you're not able to metabolize it in a productive way.
right. Yeah. There's, when I was younger, being in a band, being an author, there's, sort of like Broken Hope. I always felt were sort of like underdogs, if you will. Like the year we came out, our form was 1988, and early 90s, there was a big wave of death metal bands that were getting signed. And when we got signed, we had formed that year. We had formed there are a number of non-legendary death metal bands that are super huge, and like I think we kind of missed the boat on between 1990 and 1991. Our debut album didn't come out till 91. 1990, bands that I grew up with that were like peers of mine really took off, really got a head start. But when we came out, we were very prolific. We just kept pumping out albums and whatnot. But there's this funny kind of thing where it's like, I think we missed this 12-month gap of this big wave of stuff coming out. Then we came out, and we never quite got to that level of, say, like a Cannibal Corpse or an Obituary. We were more of like, I think, underdogs, if you will.
Yeah.
But we, it was kind of like one part when I was younger, maybe a little envious, because all I wanted to do is tour and become a household name and all that stuff. But at the same time, a lot of those bands are friends of mine, so I was happy for their success, But there was that pinch of like why aren't we on that tour, or why didn't we get that opportunity? What's going on, even with our agents? Like, what, can't you make something happen? But I just learned to roll with it. And the same with writing books. Part of it is you got to learn what the business is like too. The music business and the publishing business, what reality is. And I guess with me, I've learned to be more celebratory for people's achievements and proud of people's success, if you will. You know what I mean? And it's both those arts, music and writing, you have to learn to have a thick skin. One, it really all starts with, why are you doing this? And remember that passion I talked about earlier?
Yeah.
I do it because I love it. I'm passionate about it. So I'm of the realization of, if I don't become a household name, that's fine. as long as I'm writing books and music, I do it for myself anyway. I'd still be doing it, if I didn't have a record deal or a publishing deal. It's just what I love to do. And it's a great thing to find that out in life, that something you have a passion for gives you joy, if you will,
Yeah.
But the other thing is being realistic about where you're at in the world. Like, it's not a contest, I think I say this with a lot of writers. I think there's like competition with
Big time.
writers,
Yeah.
and it's like, it's not a contest, to be like who's more popular or whatever. It's like, you should lift other people up, be happy for people who got success, and just keep doing what you do, and if you get big and successful, more power to you. And if not, you're still going to do it because you're passionate about it. That's the way I look at it,
Yeah. That's a brilliant way of looking at it, Jeremy. Yeah, I really like hearing you say that. It's I think it's good for people to hear too. Like, as long as you can stay in the game and keep doing it because you love it, if you hit it, if you get on the rocket ship and you become Metallica, great. Or maybe you're Testament, who's like amazing band, but they didn't get quite on the same rocket ship.
Right.
But they're still great, and they're still touring, and they're still making a living. And that unto itself is like a victory to see, two metal bands from the 80s who came out in the same year who got on different paths.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And if you look at Testament, like I'm really good friends with Chuck Billy, actually.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I'll be seeing him this week. He's coming to my stepson's wedding.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and when you see Chuck and Testament, you're right. They never got to Metallica level, but they're a hell of a band. They still are pumping out their best music yet. It's like, it's incredible. They just never stop. And when you see them live, you see them enjoying themselves, having a great time. They have made a name for themselves, and they're still doing it. And that's passion right there, my friend. They're still passionate about doing it, and that to me is inspiring too, because those guys are a little bit older than me, by several years. And it's funny when I talk about age, because when I was so into Metallica as a teenager, and I try to see how old they were in magazine articles, before Wikipedia, when you could go and find out how old someone is. And I'd be like, wow, these guys are in their 20s. When I'm their age, I hope I'm doing that. I remember thinking that way as a teenager, like setting goals based on age.
Yeah.
Then when I got older, I realized, age doesn't matter. It's about, just do what you do, do you, let them do them, and make your own mark or whatever, just do what you want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to, lock into your groove and running your own race, that comes with time, but it's hard to not, peek over your shoulder and have those things. So I'm glad, that's so great to hear you speak to it that way. Yeah. And Curtis is someone who has definitively run his own race and everything. So how did you two get to know each other so that would eventually set the table for this project, for this book?
Well, it all started when I think it was here in Chicago, Lollapalooza was, 20 something, 15, 16, something like that, maybe. Curtis had a restaurant called Grace. Lollapalooza was that summer in Chicago, as it is in Chicago every year. And it was the first time Metallica headlined Lollapalooza. So I'm friends with Kirk Hammett of Metallica, and the band was in town for a few days. Cool. And to set up production and rehearse and do things. So I wanted to take him out to dinner, and he had a guy working for him who's a good friend of mine, who suggested two different restaurants in Chicago. One's called the Linea, which is still around. One's called Grace, which was Curtis's first big restaurant. Now, where he was the main guy, the restaurant was built around him and all that. And it was a 3 Michelin star restaurant. So we ended up going to Grace to check it out. And then I met Curtis and found out he was a huge metalhead. He was like really happy to have Kirk there, and gave us a private dining area, and was just really great to us. And him and I just hit it off and clicked. And we kept in touch right after that dinner, became good, really great friends. And then some couple years went by, and Grace ended up imploding. They went out of business. Curtis left the restaurant after a falling out with the investor who actually owned the restaurant. It was right around that time when Curtis hit me up and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something important." And I'm like, "All right, come on by. Let's talk." So I didn't know what he wanted to talk about. This was down in Miami. His wife is from Miami, and my wife and I spend half the year in Miami Beach. So we do like the snowbird thing. We were born in the wrong climate. We never did well with ice and snow. So we go to Miami Beach. So Curtis is down there seeing his wife. I was down there for the season. He came over. I thought, oh, maybe he wants to go jet skiing or something, get out of the house. And lo and behold, he's like, "I want you to write my memoir." And I'm like, "Really?" And I tell this story to everybody, but it never gets old because it's kind of funny, because I'm like, why do you want to write a memoir? You're a young guy. Why don't you wait till you're older? Like, I always think of Keith Richards, why don't you wait till you're Richards' age, write a memoir your whole life? He's like, well, the documentary that came out about me only scratched the surface of my life. It just glossed over things. And I'm like, how so? Tell me something I don't know about you that's not in the documentary or any interview I read. And I knew him really well by this time, but he told me stuff that's in the book I had no idea, like the way he grew up in that crazy biker household. And I'm like, holy cow. I'm like, that's got me totally floored right now. I'm totally hooked on what you're telling me. And I said, well, why me? Why would you want me to write it? And he's like, well, I read your other 2 novels that came out at that time before that. And I really like your writing. I really trust you. Like, you're one guy I trusted to do this right and do my story right. So on my end, I'm like very honored that he held me in that regard and trusted me that much. But as a writer, I only write what I'm into. I have the luxury of just writing for myself, writing things that interest me, fascinate me. I aside from novels, I also do screenwriting and scripts. So I've been paid to create TV shows and like a 10-episode bio series that I did too for another production company. But those gigs were only, I did them because I was really into the subject matter, It wasn't for the money. So I said, Curtis, I'm into this. I mean, I really want to write this. But you got to do me a favor. If I take this on, you have to be brutally honest, because what you're telling me is so compelling and it has my interest. I want to write about it. But as a reader, if I were a fan, reading this book, I want, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want you to rip the Band-Aid off, rip the scabs off, and tell the truth. Because from my experience, I've read a lot of memoirs that are super boring and just fluff. Like, man, this has no interesting value whatsoever. This guy's not saying anything, right? So Curtis is like, I'll be brutally honest. That's part of me wanting to do the book. So right then and there, we agreed to be partners on the book, and that's how it all started. And we signed a partnership agreement between us, and the arrangement was I was going to interview him. I did about 60 hours of interviews with him, transcribe them, and then build the book from there. So I wanted to retain Curtis's voice and use all that info that he gave me that came out of his mouth, convey that, but also being a novelist for so long, I wanted to come at this with a creative level, with my own brand of writing, if you will. So when you read it, for example, what I want to do is immerse readers in Curtis's shoes at that moment in time. So whether he's in grade school, you're the reader, you hear him talking about it, but you also feel those sensory things, whether it's joy, pain, whatever's going on in that environment at that time. Again, in grade school, high school, his 20s on, everything. I wanted to really bring things in to make it really more personable to the reader too. So you have his uncut, unflinching life story that he's telling you, and then you have me taking that and using my skills to carry that story in a unique way, So
For sure.
one part his voice, and then one part my brand of writing, putting it together. You know what I mean?
For sure. And bringing up voice, you bring up a topic or thread I wanted to pull on that, as someone who's a co-writer or ghostwriter, you have your own style, your own voice as a lyricist and a writer of your own work. But this is Curtis's story. And so you need to kind of translate his voice onto the page and kind of get yourself out of it. So what's the challenge of writing in his voice when you're doing the heavy lifting of the actual prose?
The only challenge I had was I think I retained his voice. Just knowing him so well too helps. Like the recordings I did, there's the things he said were verbatim, so you're getting what Curtis said, but then there's also even a way he talks, inflection and whatnot. An early first draft of the book, it was so long. I mean, it was like 1,000 manuscript pages I had to work through once all those transcriptions were done. And there's parts of the book where, we're so comfy around each other. It's like two bros, hanging out, having a coffee or a beer or something and loosening up, and just the record button's on and we're just going. But what I was, when I had that first draft, that monster of a first draft, I had to clean up a lot of stuff because there's, repetition, if you will. Sometimes you do so many hours of recording, sometimes the same thing gets said again, right? And also that comfort level. Curtis Duffy is a super refined, super focused 3 Michelin fine dining chef. But when you talk to him, I told you he's a metal guy. He's really down to earth, just a regular, cool, great dude. And he drops so many F-bombs that you think he was a drunken sailor sometimes, or truck driver. So I had to go through and clean up the parts where it's like two bros talking. He's saying important things, but the way he's saying them is okay, I got to clean up some of the language, or get him get the story and his voice on track where he's hitting home, getting rid of redundancies, that kind of thing. So the challenge was not so much retaining his voice, if you will, and making sure that came through to readers. It was more of the structure. How am I going to structure this book clean it up and really, tell a story in a unique way. Where do I start and whatnot? Again, keeping his voice and carrying that through wasn't as difficult as it could be. Depending when I would imagine. Because I haven't written a memoir for anyone before, so I would imagine there's ghostwriters who get hired to write a book, say for a celebrity or someone. They don't really know that person, so the comfort level might not be there in those situations, and they might not be spending the amount of quality time like I did with Curtis to really grasp it. If you know what I mean.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of the structure, I was struck by the non-linear nature of some of it. It wasn't like a straight chronology. You do kind of jump from, theme to theme or vignette to vignette, from teenager to professional and back and forth again. So when did that strike you as the thumb you're putting on the scale of this, or the way you're thinking of shaping it?
When it came to structure, I had I had my own ideas, but I also wanted to work with. There's an editor I really wanted to work with named Helen Rogan, and she was fantastic. She's really great at structure, and in one of the earlier drafts, I had this idea of I wanted to be super original and tell the story, each chapter in third person, to set it up where I'm really using my imagination to recreate things Curtis had told me about where he'd grown up, say, or things that happened, and setting that up at the beginning of the chapter, and then bringing Curtis in first person. And I was looking at doing it that way. And I did kind of start a little bit in a chronological fashion. And then what happened is I wasn't really happy with that in that structure. And Helen helped me by taking parts of his life and suggesting, why don't you try, doing this and putting this here. And I tried that. That's where I started doing things on a non-linear way. And also, during the course of interviewing him, I knew that based on his popularity as a chef, there's going to be people who going to want to know about the food stuff. And the food stuff is woven through there. If you're foodies or fans of Curtis's food, and some people are just obsessed with cooking and whatnot, and I get it. That's important. He had an important personal story to tell, as well as how he got to where he is as a 3 Michelin star chef. After living with that book, after the first couple of drafts, going back and forth with ideas, that's when I decided I really want to kick things off for a reader to know what they're in store for. Because Curtis came from a really brutal place and survived things that most people would have just thrown the towel in and not made it through the other side. And so that first chapter, spoiler alert for anyone watching this or listening to this, is when the scene with the detectives and he's looking at the autopsy photos of his parents. That to me was such a heartbreaking thing to hear in person. For one, it was just like when he was telling me that, I was like, oh, this happened to you? I mean, I can't believe it. And we cried a lot. There were a lot of tears when we were doing that interview process. And that was really hard. And I remember that just hitting me in the gut, being forced as a teenager to look at those photos because those detectives were so twisted. So that's what I wanted, that to be the first thing people read, to make a reader go, what the hell is happening here? Curtis is a teenager and these detectives are doing this to him. And that's how I wanted to kick it off, just as a kind of like a hard, slap in your face, like, hey, pay attention. You're in for a hell of a ride. And then the next chapter starts with, I love fennel. And he gives it cooking, and fennel and food and stuff in the kitchen. So I wanted to weave it all together, the worlds of Curtis Duffy's upbringing and his culinary journey and trajectory with his culinary journey and trajectory. I look at them as two different things: the personal life and that cooking life. They got tied in together, from an early age of Curtis, and I just worked my tail off to pull it off that way, to make it work, and have it all in there. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And so critical to Curtis's development certainly as a chef, but definitely as someone who needed some ballast in his life was Ruth Snyder, a very important teacher for him. And also, I'm blanking on his name. His last name was Saunders, but he was a history teacher at the same
Saunders.
John Saunders, who also moonlighted as a waiter or sommelier or something, and as a waiter, I think, and really gave Curtis, both of them turned a light on for him, and I think that's so integral to his story.
John Saunders' John Saunders' daughter just sent Curtis a 2-page letter that he texted to me, and it was the sweetest, most heartfelt letter, man. She was like, I always thought my father was this amazing man that I held on a pedestal. And when I read about what you wrote about my father and what he meant to you, reminded me of what a great father my dad was. John Saunders had passed away some years ago. And that was incredible to read, because she said the book and what Curtis had to say about him just, moved her tremendously. And that was amazing. And to that end, people like John Saunders and Ruth Snyder, as you know from reading Fireproof, made all the difference in the world. And young people who are in a bad place at home with family or in life, it's important that they have life preservers like that. Like Curtis says, there's a line where he says something about people say angels don't walk among us. I have 2 words: Ruth Snyder. That's one of his angels. So yeah, those were 2 very important people in his life who took him under their wing, and I think helped make him the man that he is. And kept him on track. Like, you can do anything in life. And that's what Curtis's message is. Ultimately, at the end of the book, you can do anything in life if you work at it.
Oh, for sure. Well, you get a sense, and you hear this, be it on cooking channels and cooking shows, or hearing chefs talk about how the kitchen and kitchen culture can really save their lives, and has saved so many lives. I mean, it can be a very toxic and disruptive atmosphere, but in a lot of ways, it saves a lot of lives, and it certainly saved Curtis's.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that saying that Curtis says, and I've read Anthony Bourdain say when he was alive, that the kitchen is the last refuge for the misfits. That's like the place for the people who don't fit in. They wind up in the kitchen, and but they love the craft. They love the hours, and it is to a certain degree a life-saving place, especially in Curtis's case. Like you said, that's where his safe harbor was. It got him out of the house, which the house was a hellhole, horrible place for him to be. So the more he could be out of that house and out of that toxic environment, the better. And the kitchen afforded him that. Plus, he just discovered the joy he gave to people. Like he says, I can make a dish in minutes and see someone eat it and smile and get satisfaction. If I was a musician, it would take me months, a year to get my music recorded and out and get that reaction. So there's that instant gratification of making other people happy, and then just that passion for cooking and creating.
Well, there's that element of the discipline of the kitchen when you really lean in. Like when you see Curtis in public and see images of him, he's very put together. He's got the chef outfit on. And that's you write in the book how how he likes that degree of very regimented discipline, very put together. And you can tell like that because his home life and because his childhood was so frenetic without any structure and so chaotic, you can see where he would lean in to these mentors at these very prestigious restaurants that provided that degree of order. And that must have just been so calming in a sense, even though the kitchen is chaotic unto itself, but it's controlled chaos.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And in his kitchen, one thing about his approach to his team is dead quiet. There's like no, you don't hear any sound outside of like maybe some cutlery and dishes being put down and whatnot. But each cook and chef at their station is dead quiet with their tweezers and everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's no yelling. There's nothing. It's the craziest thing. I've been in that kitchen numerous times. I can't believe how quiet and focused everyone is. It's something to behold, because you watch a TV show like Hell's Kitchen, it ain't Hell's Kitchen. It's like the opposite, you know?
Exactly. Well, it may be like reading this book and just having been kind of fascinated with restaurant culture and the cult of personality around celebrity chefs and what type of person becomes wants to become a celebrity chef versus just a chef. Like I had a thing like, something, just a note I had, just like the rise of the celebrity chef and how this corrupts the craft, and like a delineation between what it means to be a chef versus a chef brand celebrity in the cooking industrial complex. Like this got me really thinking about those terms. And I don't know, just as you were immersed in Curtis's life and his story, in what ways have you seen, just this sort of corruption of the craft by this notion that you have to be like Emeril Lagasse or David Chang?
I've seen it through Curtis actually talking to him about that very subject, for the book. He's a guy who, when you read Fireproof, you'll see him say it. He doesn't care for celebrity chefs. He'd been asked to be on so many different cooking shows over the years, and he's declined. He felt that if he were to do certain things, it would be something that would affect his integrity, right? Because he didn't get into cooking to be on TV. Now, he has been on Iron Chef, but I think that was for a good cause, to raise money for something. And he went up against a chef, Dominic Kren, I believe is her name. And she ended up winning. But his whole outside of that, his whole angle has been, and he was a guest judge on another cooking show, a big one. I can't remember the name, but he never got into cooking to be on TV or even for awards for that matter. He does it all for the craft. But what he's told me is he gets young chefs who come through his door looking to work there at Ever Restaurant, his new restaurant. And they're like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? It's kind of like one of those things, like they're like, got my own cooking show and I'm going to do this on TV. And his attitude when he hears that is like, maybe you should go to acting school and get an agent, because they care more about being on TV than the actual craft of cooking, and he'll tell me too, he'll question them, he'll ask them to make them something just to see where their skill set is in a kitchen. And a lot of them don't have the skills. They just there's like this popularity celebrity thing. It's the weirdest thing. And again, I'm just sharing that through my observations of what Curtis told me, And it just seems like that's a big thing out there to young chefs and whatnot. And Curtis also says to young chefs, before you get in this business, do you really want to put the hours in? Are you really dedicated to the craft? You want work 17 hours a day, and that's one thing. But the other thing he urges that he never got when he was younger is he urges young people who want to be chefs or restaurateurs to go to business school as well. There's a big part of the business you want to learn as well, aside from, of course, the culinary thing that's a given. So that was interesting to hear. And the other thing that blew me away too, since we're on the subject of young chefs who want to be celebrity TV chefs, there's a lot of young chefs, Curtis told me, that they don't actually realize where their food comes from. Like there's some that he's done classes at culinary institutes, and when he told me this, I go, no effing way, you're lying. No, you gotta be kidding me. But he's like, what he told me is I've had students who think their carrots come from the grocery store. They don't know carrots are in a garden and they're pulled out of the ground. And I'm like, get out of here. He's like, I swear to God, there's young people that don't know where their food comes from. It's the craziest thing. So, and I think that says something about that mentality, circling back to like a young person being like, oh, I want to be like Emeril Lagasse or Gordon Ramsay and, have a cooking TV show. There's not a lot of worth there. That's a different type of animal, versus what Curtis Duffy is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a moment in the book where you're echoing it right here. He's like, you need to know like profit and loss, spreadsheet, budgets, scheduling, social media. And like, you write,
Yeah.
you might hate that shit and only want to cook. Too bad. That ain't the world we're living in now. You have to do it all.
Yeah.
And that not only speaks to cooking, but it speaks to being an author now too.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I'm at a place where I got my next novel is coming out in January, and like with Fireproof, with the publicity teams that we got working the books, it's like you have to, have a website. They want you to do newsletters, and then social media across the board. I've got maybe 3 accounts that I use, primarily like Instagram, Facebook, and my old Twitter, now X account. But there's so many things that they want me to use, TikTok, Threads, this and that. And it's like, I'm like, wow, you got to have all this to be a writer, or they want you to have this to be a writer. It's like, I need time to write, doing these posts and a newsletter, it takes time. There's some authors I'm amazed. They got a regularly scheduled newsletter that'll come out like every week. And to me, it's like, wow, where do you find the time? Because just me writing a novel itself, when I'm in that zone, I'm so focused and I'm not worried about social media and whatnot. But, this day and age, it's like they're necessary evils, if you will, to, if you want to promote your wares, be it a new book like Fireproof or a novel or even an album, if you're in a band, you got to get stuff out there on social platforms. So what Curtis said is right. And you having that posed to authors, you're dead on correct. It's the same thing. You need that stuff, and it doesn't hurt to get an education in the business of publishing too. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, it's it echoes just what we were saying earlier about people coming up with the wrong intentions of being a chef, like doing it to become a celebrity versus doing it for the craft. It's like if you get good at social media or newsletter, all like that work around the work, but you're like a shitty writer or a shitty cook or a shitty chef, then all you're doing is promoting how bad you are. So it's like you still need to be like very good and very sound as a musician, a writer, a chef, and then you can leverage the other things to show how good you are and get your work out there. But it's like so many people do it backwards. They get good at that, but they're not really good at the thing that they purport to want to be good at.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very circuitous way of talking.
Yeah. I get it though. Yeah, I totally get it.
Very nice. Jeremy, you've been really generous with your time, and I could really talk to you all day about Fireproof. But I want to be mindful of your time. And as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love asking the guests just for a recommendation of some kind for the listeners out there. And that can just be like anything you're excited about, be it an album, a book, or a fanny pack, or a brand of socks. So I would just extend that to you.
Sure. I actually just finished a book by S.A. Cosby called King of Ashes. And I loved it. It's one of the best things I've read in ages. He did a book a couple books back called Razorblade Tears that was one of the best books I had read that year. So this new one, King of Ashes, that's the most brand new thing book wise that I've read that really blew me away. And then there's a band. They're a death metal band called Sanguisugabog. And they have a new album that just came out, and that's really good. I've been jamming on that recently. And then other than that, I've been I go back and binge watch old TV shows. So I'm binge watching one of my old favorites, Boardwalk Empire, on HBO right now. And goddamn, I love that series. So that's those are three things that got my world rocking. Other than that, I just wanted to mention that novel I told you about. Wretch is the name of my new novel. It'll be coming out in January. There's another novel another author has coming out, I think, right after that. I saw him promoting, also called Wretch, not to be confused with Jeremy Wagner's Wretch. But mine's coming out in January, and that's kind of like a dark crime splatterpunk horror thing. So
cool.
It's still right in my brand of, horror. So that's coming out. So thanks for letting me mention that. But other than that, Brandon, thanks for having me on, bro. I really appreciate your time. And I could talk to you all day.
Yes. Awesome. How great was that? That was really fun. Very cool to talk to people with such a varied artistic life. I really find inspiration from that. And he's just a true artist. Awesome stuff. Go to jeremyxwagner.com to learn more about Jeremy. The name of the book again is Fireproof, a memoir of a chef. It's a great book. And you can follow the show on Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast and subscribe to the newsletters, Rage Against the Algorithm, and Pitch Club. There was a moment in this conversation where Jeremy riffed on having to know the business you're in. It's a great passage from Fireproof where Curtis talks about knowing the food business inside and out. And a few parting shots ago, I talked about a writer who I had come into contact with who was adamant that their job was not to sell their book. It was to write books and leave it up to everyone else to sell it, to which some people were nodding, and I'm just like, oh, fuck, put my hand up, but no one called on me. This is a recipe for bitterness, resentment, and self-sabotage, if I'm being honest. Likewise, a chef or a restaurateur might just want to cook and create recipes, but that's only a fraction of it. Yes, it's the most important fraction of it, because if your craft is garbage while you get good at promoting or going on all cooking shows and being consumed with influencer culture and celebrity culture, you're just going to end up promoting how bad you are. Same goes for writing, too. Mastering your craft is imperative. Constant improvement, attention to the subtleties, experimentation. But as independent contractors, we need to know how to pitch, how to handle our finances. Skim some of that money from a check for the tax man, because the tax man's always coming. There's platform building and community building. There's attending the readings, and you have to study the masters of the past and also the masters of the present. So when you turn pro, there's all these things, these other elements you have to be aware of unless you want to be invisible and wallow in obscurity. So much of doing this kind of work is not the work you signed up for. But make no mistake, it's part of the job. It's easy to get washed up or carried away by social media and confuse that with the work, because in a way it feels like work, but it's really not. It's a sliver. But I see far too many writers wasting time on the wrong things, a failure of priority, putting second things first, third things first, as Stephen Covey once wrote. The writing and craft always comes first, but it isn't the one and only, as much as we want it to be. I'm sure there are myriad chefs who just want to cook and perhaps scoff at the chefs who have cultivated a public image, who go on all these competition shows and judge and all that stuff. And it draws them more attention, and thus maybe a fuller dining room night after night. It's the same with writers. Unless you're in that sliver of the 1% who draw a regular salary and have institutional support that does the promotion for you, then you got to learn about the business. You have to read the books about publishing industry. You need to know how it operates and what your options are. You need to read Jane Friedman's The Business of Being a Writer, so you understand the totality of the job. Or, visit the archive of the Writers Co-op podcast with Woo-Dan Yan and Jenny Gritters or something. I think she sunsetted it, but there's a lot of conversations there, and you can very much tell she and Jenny thought about it in terms of dollars and cents. I'm one to give everything away in the hopes that the platform builds and then I can leverage platform for shit. But they definitely think about charging for the extras, like worksheets and all sorts of stuff. But that's why she's the boss, and I'm decidedly not. This business does a really good job of frustrating people into bitterness or PR or law school. As artists, it's hard to think about the things that keep the lights on. I see many painters, and I'm sure you have too, who do these paint and sip nights. They might have fun. I don't know if they do or not. But it's below them. But those classes, populated mainly by drunk white women, help keep the lights on so the artists can really ply their trade, elsewhere. I'm not sure what the writer equivalent of that might be, but you do yourself a disservice by not learning about the totality of the industry you've adopted. And I hope listening to Jeremy talk about it with how he's thought about his creative life, and then, maybe that'll inspire you to learn some of the other things. I know I can stand to learn far more about those ins and outs, even though I have a pretty good idea about it. But you can always learn more, and the more you know, maybe the less frustrated we can all be. And then if we're less frustrated, we can do better work. And if we can do better work, we can lift up other people. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.